Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another Commander Precon upgrade video. This time we will be upgrading the Jeskai Striker Precon deck from Tarkir Dragonstorm. Let's get into it. Really fast, before discussing the commander we will be using, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade format that we use here at Shuffle Source. The first item to note is that we will either use the primary or the secondary commander from the deck. Next, we have a cap of around $100 or less that we use when choosing the upgrades. We will be adding 10 cards and we will be removing 10 cards. Additionally, we do add a few what we call no budget options near the end of the video for people that either already have these cards or maybe have a little bit extra in their budget to continue to upgrade the deck further. And lastly, we do use market value pricing provided by TCG Player at the time of recording, which will be displayed at the bottom of the screen as we discuss the cards. So the commander we will be discussing today is Shiko and Narset Unified. For one colorless, a blue, a red, and a white, you get a 4/4 legendary creature human spirit dragon that has flying and vigilance. It also has flurry. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, copy that spell if it targets a permanent or player, and you may choose new targets for the copy. If you don't copy a spell this way, draw a card. So the first thing to note is having both flying and vigilance is actually really nice and becomes quite relevant. Being able to swing in for damage with evasion against our opponents is great, and then being able to leave it untapped to keep as either a flying blocker, or if you need to be able to tap it later for any other reason, is very useful. In playtesting, I found that I was able to chip away at my opponent's life total pretty safely and consistently with this commander out. However, the real star of the show for our commander is the second ability here. Whenever we cast our second spell each turn, we get to copy that spell if it targets a permanent or player. Then we can also choose new targets for that copy if we want, or if the spell doesn't target, we can instead elect to draw a card, which even that card draw is always nice and is especially relevant in a deck that wants to sling a lot of spells per turn. Being able to copy our spells that targets permanents or players is a very powerful ability. We can copy removal, extra turn spells, clones, big X cost spells, anything that targets is fair game here and will work great with our commander. So the way we want to upgrade this deck is by adding additional card draw, putting in more spell slinger payoffs, and by adding some very strong targeting spells for our commander's flurry ability. So here we've made it to the first of our additions, coming in at $3.76. We have Chandra's Ignition. For 3 colorless and 2 red, we have a sorcery that reads, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. So I really like this as a board wipe option for this deck because of the fact that it effectively allows us to keep a creature on the board. It also deals damage to our opponents as well, and since it targets, you can copy this spell with our commander. There are also a few ways to pump up our commander's power in this deck to even make it deal more damage. But let's say you just cast this and copy it with your commander just using its base power. You're going to deal 8 damage to all other creatures and each opponent. That's pretty strong and will deal with most creatures in the game and still be able to keep your commander on board. So here's our next addition. For $1.99, we have Frostcliff Siege. For 1 colorless, a blue and a red, we have an enchantment that reads, as this enchantment enters, choose Jeskai or Teamer. If you choose Jeskai, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. If you choose Teamer, creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample and haste. So this enchantment offers us 2 modes to choose from, and each one is useful to this deck depending on what you need at the time. If you choose Jeskai, you get to draw a card whenever you deal combat damage to a player. As I mentioned in our commander overview, you might be surprised at how often you get to smack your opponents with your flying commander, and being able to get card draw off that is even better. Additionally, we have the ability to go fairly wide with this deck with the tokens that we can produce, so being able to smack multiple opponents for multiple cards can definitely happen. If you choose the Teamer mode, you give all of your creatures +1/+0 trample and haste. I also like that you can play this the turn before your commander comes out, so if you play this on turn 3, you immediately can swing with your commander on turn 4 if you choose the Teamer option. Or like I mentioned before, you will have a lot of tokens with this deck, and some of the tokens will have prowess. If you want to buff up your monk tokens by playing non-creature spells, you can get some of that extra damage through with the trample when you swing in with them. Our next edition, coming in at $3.13, we have Irenicus's Vile Duplication. For 3 colorless and 1 blue, we have a sorcery that reads, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except the token has flying and isn't legendary if that creature is legendary. So there are a ton of good creatures to copy in our deck, especially after the upgrades we're going to be doing here. However, one of, if not the best option to create a token copy of is our commander. With this spell, we can create a token copy of Shiko and Narset unified, and because the spell gets around the legendary rule, we can keep both on the battlefield. Now, even that alone sounds pretty strong, but consider what will happen if we use our commander's ability to cast a copy of this spell on our commander as well. We will now have 3 Shiko and Narset unified creatures on the battlefield, which is so powerful. If your opponents don't do anything or act quickly after this, the game isn't going to last much longer for them. Because now imagine getting 3 copy triggers whenever you cast your second spell each turn. This is just such a good card and definitely worth adding to this deck. So our next edition is a bit of a pricey one. Coming in at $20.79, we have Jeska's Will for 2 colorless and 1 red. We have a sorcery that reads choose one. If you control a commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. Add 1 red for each card in target opponent's hand. And the other mode is exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So this card is on the Game Changers list, and it is for good reason. The best time to use this spell is obviously when we have our commander out, because you get to choose both options. The ability to add a red mana for each card in our target opponent's hand, and we can exile the top 3 cards of our library and play them this turn. But what makes this card especially good in this deck, you'll notice that the first mode mentions target opponent's hand, which means that this is eligible to be copied by our commander's ability to get the effects of this card twice. This is going to set up for some massive turns. Let's say one of your opponents has 7 cards. You are now going to get 14 red mana and 6 new exiled cards to play until the end of the turn. This card is amazing on its own, which is why it's on the Game Changers list, but in this deck it even goes to the next level. Our next edition, coming in at 17 cents, is Modify Memory. For 4 colorless and 1 blue, you have a sorcery that reads exchange control of 2 target creatures controlled by different players. If you control neither creature, draw 3 cards. So Modify Memory is a fantastic copy payoff target for our commander's ability. Being able to swap around creatures on its own is potentially powerful, but if you don't control any of the creatures that you target to swap with, you instead get to draw 3 cards. If you copy this spell, not only do you get to swap 2 creatures again, but you can potentially draw another 3 cards if you would rather do that, which means you can draw 6 cards for the rate of 5 mana. It's also important to note that this card doesn't say non-token creature, and we have the ability to create quite a bit of 1/1 tokens. So if we want to swap out one of our 1/1 tokens for a crazy creature on our opponent's board, that sounds like a great trade. We can also steal people's commanders with this card. It just gives us a lot of options. A fun note about that is, let's say our opponent has their commander out, but it's one of those commanders that's only really good with a specific deck built around it. If you swap it out with a different opponent's creatures, it is now going to be way less effective as it would have been if you would have just kept it with its original owner. And by doing that, you'll end up drawing 3 cards. The flexibility you get from this card is why you should consider adding it to your deck. Our next edition comes in at $14.64. We have Narset Enlightened Exile. For 1 colorless, a blue, a red, and a white, you have a 3/4 legendary creature human monk that has creatures you control have prowess. Whenever Narset Enlightened Exile attacks, exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So the first thing to mention here is Narset gives all of your creatures prowess, including herself. As a reminder to what prowess does, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Again, as I mentioned before, this deck has the ability to create a decent amount of tokens. Some of them will already have prowess, like our monk tokens for example, and multiple instances of prowess can stack. So you really have the ability to buff up your board by casting spells. Then when she attacks, you get to choose a non-creature, non-land card from any graveyard, exile it, and make a copy of that spell, and then cast it for free as long as the mana value is less than Narset's power. The important part here is that it says you cast the copy, so it counts as casting a spell on your turn, which means it can help us by setting up or copying a spell from our commander's ability. Since she benefits from her own prowess ability, you can also pump her up to be able to even cast stronger spells out of graveyards. The flexibility of choosing from any graveyard is also very powerful and provides you many options. And here's our next edition for 97 cents. We have Path to Exile. For 1 white, we have an instant that reads exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this deck already comes with Swords to Plowshares, but it is missing the other, what I call must include premium removal. Path to Exile. If you're running a deck that has white in it, two of the first cards you should add to the deck are Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. Paying only a single mana to exile an opponent's creature at instant speed is some of the best targeted removal in the game. The added benefit to playing Path to Exile in this deck is that if it is the second spell you cast on a turn, you can copy the spell with your commander's ability and exile another creature. This is an absolute must include in my opinion. Our next addition comes in at $3.34. We have Sheltered by Ghosts for 1 colorless and 1 white. We have an enchantment aura that says, enchant creature you control. When Sheltered by Ghosts enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. This card is fantastic. It is a piece of removal and a buff at the same time. When it enters play, you get to exile a target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. It then also provides your creature +1/+0 lifelink and ward 2. Seeing how this card targets a permanent of our opponents, this is another spell that we can copy with our commander's flurry ability. So now if you copy this spell, you are exiling 2 permanents an opponent controls. Your commander now goes up to a 6/4 and has lifelink and effectively ward 4. This was already a good card before, but in a deck that can copy spells is even better. Our next addition we have for $13.58, we have Time Warp for 3 colors and 2 blue. We have a sorcery that reads, target player takes an extra turn after this one. Taking an extra turn is always a strong ability, but with this spell, since it targets, you have the ability to copy the spell with our commander's ability, which means if you play a spell before this one with our commander on the battlefield, we're going to be able to effectively get 2 extra turns out of playing this spell. Depending on the board state, 2 extra turns is often enough for you to be able to close out the game, or at least put yourself in such a commanding position that you can close it out very soon. There's really not too much more to say about it. Adding an extra turn is very strong. And here we have the last of our additions coming in at $5.55. We have Will of the Mardu for 2 colorless and 1 white. We have an instant that reads choose one. If you control a commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both instead. Create a number of 1/1 red warrior creature tokens equal to the number of creatures target player controls, or the other mode, Will of the Mardu deals damage to target creature equal to the number of creatures you control. So similar to Jessica's Will, this spell has multiple modes, and if our commander is out, you will be able to use both modes instead of just choosing one. The first mode will create a number of 1/1 red warrior creature tokens equal to the number of creatures that the target player controls, and then the second mode will deal damage to a target creature equal to the number of creatures that we control. As you've probably noticed, since this spell targets, we can obviously copy this with our commander, so we can effectively get the benefits from both modes twice. Now you might be thinking, okay, even if we do end up with a bunch of 1/1 warrior tokens, who cares? They're just 1/1s. Well, remember, we do have cards in this deck that can make our tokens much better. Imagine if we had Frostcliff Siege in play. Now they're all 2/1s with Trample and Haste. Or what if we have Narset Enlightened Exile in play? Now they all have Prowess. You can really make a devastating board presence with this card because of all of the other synergies that we have with this deck. And then the creature removal part of this is great as well, because if you copy this spell, you can potentially remove 2 creatures or hit a very large creature twice to remove it. This is a great card. It can really help you get an instant board and really help you thin out your opponent's creatures at the same time. And we've now made it to the removals portion of our video, and we're starting off with Ancestral Vision, which is a sorcery that has a spend 4 for 1 blue. Rather than cast this card from your hand, you can pay 1 blue and exile it with 4 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter. When the last is removed, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Target player draws 3 cards. So the issue with this card is you really are only going to be happy if you see it in the early game. In the early game, you can sort of afford to wait 4 turns before the spell resolves. However, in the mid to late game, waiting 4 turns before you can get 3 cards off of it is really a problem. I understand that it targets, so there is the potential to copy the spell when it casts after the last time counter is removed with our commander, but we're adding Modify Memory instead, which will be a much better copy target, and it gives us the flexibility between choosing between card draw and swapping creatures without having to mess with time counters at all. You would also have to play an instant at the beginning of your upkeep as well to have this be the second spell that's resolved on your turn in order to get the benefit from your commander anyway. And here we have our next removal. We have Expansion and Explosion. For Expansion, you can either play blue or red, and it is an instant that says copy target instant or sorcery spell with mana value 4 or less. You may choose new targets for the copy. And then on the Explosion side, you can pay X and 2 blue and 2 red for an instant that says Explosion deals X damage to any target. Target player draws X cards. So I do like, since it is a split card, it gives you options. However, the options you are given are just not efficient enough for me to warrant keeping it in over the other cards that we're trying to add. So the issue with the expansion side is that mana value 4 or less cap. A lot of the spells that we're adding or that we want to copy cost 5 mana. And the issue with the explosion side is that it's just very mana intensive for what you get. You need 4 color pips and X to deal X damage and to draw X cards, and that's just not a very efficient rate. Our next removal is Magma Opus. For 6 colorless, a blue and a red, we have an instant that says Magma Opus deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. Tap 2 target permanents. Create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token, draw 2 cards. Or you can also play blue or a red and blue or a red, discard, create a treasure token. So 8 mana is very expensive for a spell to include in a Spellslinger deck. In a Spellslinger deck, you really want to be able to cast multiple spells per turn, especially considering our commander's ability to let us copy the second spell that we cast each turn. Yes, because the spell targets, we do have the ability to copy this with our commander, but the issue really comes down to that mana cost. It would be pretty late in the game before you really had much of an opportunity to cast this, let alone be able to copy it with your commander at all. Additionally, a lot of the things that this card does give you is cool, but it's not really impactful enough to warrant the cost. And here we have our next removal, Shiny Impetus. For 2 colorless and 1 red, we have an enchantment aura that reads, Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. It attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. It also has, whenever enchanted creature attacks, you create a treasure token. Treasure tokens are artifacts that allow you to tap it and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color. So the idea is you obviously want to put this on your opponent's creatures, that way that they're goaded, and they end up swinging at other opponents, and you end up getting treasures out of that. But the fact is we really don't care too much about goading in this deck, and honestly, if you're using this as some sort of removal, you're better off just using the exile removals that exist in white, such as Path to Exile. Also, the other problem with this card is that 3 mana is a lot of mana for what this card can provide you, and the later that the game goes on, the easier that the creature that this is attached to can get removed, and you end up gaining treasure tokens from it. Here we have our next removal. We have Tempest Technique. For 3 colors and 1 white, we have an enchantment aura that has Storm. Whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. Copies become tokens. It also says enchant creature you control, and enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. So this is a really cool card for enchantment focused decks. The issue is that this is not an enchantment focused deck, so we will really never be able to hit the same potential with it as we could in a deck that's really enchantment focused. So 4 mana for a card that you will only be able to unlock some of its potential just doesn't seem like a very good rate to me, considering all of the other additions we're providing adds much more value overall. Our next removal we have is Think Twice. For 1 colorless and 1 blue, we have an instant that says draw a card. It also has flashback. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, you may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost, then exile it. So this is an okay card. However, we do need to make room for the additions that we're adding that is going to give us a lot more card draw than Think Twice will. Yes, Think Twice is decent for setting up our second spell each turn so that we can copy that next spell with our commander, but we did add other low mana cost spells to make up for it, and with all of the other cards we're adding, you won't miss this card in this deck. So here we have our next removal, Time Wipe. For 2 colorless and 2 white and a blue, we have a sorcery that reads, return a creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures. So I know that this is another board wipe that we are removing from this deck. However, we are also adding one back in with Chandra's Ignition, and we're also adding several other pieces of removal. Some of those pieces of targeted removal that we're adding make for great copy targets for our commander, so you'll be able to remove multiple targets. Oftentimes, being able to remove multiple targets with targeted removal is good enough instead of having to do the nuclear option of wiping the entire board. Additionally, there is another board wipe option that I'm going to mention in the no budget options portion of this video, where if you already happen to have that card, or if you really want to pick it up, it will definitely make for a better board wipe that also happens to be one-sided in your favor. Our next removal is Transforming Flourish. For 2 colorless and 1 red, we have an instant that has Demonstrate. When you cast this spell, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. Players may choose new targets for their copies. It then says, destroy target artifact or creature you don't control. If that permanent is destroyed this way, its controller exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. Then, they may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So this card is a lot like Chaos Warp in that it is a piece of removal that also gives your opponent something in return off the top of their deck. A lot of times this means they get something worse than what you targeted, but also sometimes it means they get something better. But the nice part about Chaos Warp compared to this card is that Chaos Warp can choose any type of permanent. But that's really the trade-off you get for being able to remove any type of permanent with Chaos Warp. The issue here is that the spell limits the types of things that you get to remove, and it destroys an artifact or creature instead of shuffling it into their library, which in some cases is arguably worse. And while you may be able to hit multiple targets with this if you use the Demonstrate part of this card, the issue is that unless you can politic really well with your opponents, they can really choose to affect your board as well, especially if you are the threat on the board. And that's because they get to cast a copy of this spell with Demonstrate. Additionally, you do have other ways to deal with artifacts and creatures in this deck, so we really don't need to keep this card. And here we have our next removal. We have Vanquish the Horde. For 6 colorless and 2 white, we have a sorcery that reads, this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. Destroy all creatures. So Vanquish of the Horde is not a bad board wipe. However, for this deck, there are better board wipe options. We are directly swapping this out for Chandra's Ignition, which will more than likely cost us more mana, but we will ultimately be able to keep the creature we target, ideally our commander, with it and have the ability to copy that spell with our commander because it targets. Additionally, Chandra's Ignition allows us to damage our opponents as well, while this card does not. And here we have the last of our removals. We have Velomachus Lorehold. For 5 colorless, a red and a white, we have a 5/5 legendary creature Elder Dragon that has flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever Velomachus Lorehold attacks, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to Velomachus Lorehold's power from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is a fun new card. However, 7 mana is a lot to invest in a creature that has an ability that has the opportunity to whiff on the 7 cards you look at. Now, the ability is off of an attack trigger and it does have haste, so you will get the opportunity to do it the turn it comes down and in future combat phases if it sticks around. However, with that being said, a more consistent strategy would be for us to use the same 7 mana to set up 2 spells per turn to take advantage of our commander's copy ability. This allows us to more reliably control what the second spell will be that we want to copy. This card also just has a bit too much variability on what cards you get to hit from the top of your library. So for that, we're going to cut the card. We have now made it to the no budget options part of our video, and we're kicking things off for $10.62. We have Bria Riptide Rogue. For 2 colorless, a blue and a red. We have a 3/3 legendary creature Otter Rogue that has prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and other creatures you control have prowess. If a creature has multiple instances of prowess, each triggers separately. And then it also has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So Bria is very similar to Narset and Lightened Exile in that this is another card that can give all of our creatures prowess and also has prowess itself. Giving our creatures prowess in a deck that casts a lot of non-creature spells is a great way to pump up our board and swing in for a lot of damage to our opponents. But what really makes Bria shine is her last ability. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature we control can't be blocked this turn. This is such a strong ability because we have several creatures that we want to be able to connect with after we pump them up with the prowess triggers. Elsha Threefold Master, for example, is an excellent creature to make unblockable because she will create 1/1 monk creature tokens with prowess for each damage that she deals. She also has prowess on her own, so with Bria on the board, she will benefit from the prowess trigger twice, meaning she is very easy to pump up and can create so many monk tokens when she connects for damage. Bria is truly a force multiplier and a great inclusion to this deck. Here we have our next no budget option for $32.78. We have Cyclonic Rift. For 1 colorless and 1 blue. We have an instant that says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. It also has Overload. For 6 colorless and 1 blue. You may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change target in its text to each. So this is another card that is on the Game Changers list for a good reason. This is probably the best board wipe in blue that can be used in many instances to close out the game. This card allows us to return a target non-land permanent we don't control to its owner's hand, but if you obviously pay for its overload cost, you can change the word target to each, and you effectively send everything on your opponent's board back to their hand with the exception of their lands. If you have a board of creatures, you are effectively swinging freely now because this doesn't affect our board at all. While 9 out of 10 times you will probably use this spell with its overload cost, it can in a pinch be used for its single targeted removal if you really need it. And in this deck, we can copy the spell with our commander if it's the second spell on a given turn, so we could return 2 things this way. And here we have the last of our no budget options coming in at $55.23. We have Ristic Study for 2 colorless and 1 blue. We have an enchantment that reads, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. So this is one of, if not the best card draw enchantment in the game. You have the ability to draw so many cards from this card on the battlefield if your opponents don't do anything about it. It's also not capped at once per turn, and it taxes your opponents if they don't want you to draw cards from it. Now, it is possible that all 3 of your opponents pay the taxes on this card and you don't get to draw very many cards from it. But there is usually always at least 1 player per group who won't pay, so you will definitely get some cards from it. And even if they did all pay their taxes on this, that means that they're using their mana to stop you from drawing cards instead of progressing their own game plan. Card draw is strong for any commander deck, and this remains one of the best ways to consistently get card draw. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $67.92. This total does not include the no budget options that we just went over. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to like and subscribe to be able to stay up to date on more Magic the Gathering content. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the Jeskai Striker Precon. Which cards did you end up adding to your deck? Out of all of the 5 Tarkir Dragonstorm Precons, which one is your favorite? I would really like to know. If you want to see some Tarkir Dragonstorm gameplay, you can check out the video link here and watch me and 3 of my friends battle it out to see which of the Tarkir Dragonstorm Precons take the victory. Until next time, thank you for watching.